Rome adored the spectacle of its emperor. To the public, Nero was not only Caesar but also an artist, a performer who believed he was chosen by the gods to unite empire and stage. His voice, trembling yet passionate, rang across amphitheaters as he sang of myths and heroes. His hands, more accustomed to instruments than to the sword, plucked the cithara with feverish devotion. He relished the thunder of applause, even when it was bought through bribes or demanded through fear. Yet behind the velvet curtains and the carefully orchestrated ovations, there lurked a hunger far more dangerous than applause: Nero's need to control beauty itself. He despised imperfection, not just in art but in people, in places, in memories. The empire to him was not a realm to be ruled, but a stage to be perfected. Every marble column and every trembling courtier a piece in his grand performance. This obsession made him unpredictable. Senators who flattered his artistry were rewarded beyond measure. Those who mocked it, even in whispers, vanished into dungeons or returned home in funerary urns. He could summon poets to compose verses in his honor, only to hurl their scrolls into the fire if the meter failed to capture his image as he envisioned it. His palace walls bore frescoes of gods, yet the gods often bore his face. But his obsession went deeper still, into the private corridors where only a select few ever dared tread. In the silent hours of night, Nero would pace the gilded halls of the Domus Aurea, running his fingers across mosaic floors as though tracing the veins of the empire. He demanded mirrors in every chamber, not to admire his features alone, but to study himself as an eternal figure, half mortal, half divine, a man rehearsing for immortality. Rome, however, demanded something else. An emperor was expected to lead armies, to negotiate treaties, to sit in solemn dignity at the Senate. Nero despised such obligations. To him, the Senate was a dull chorus, armies were blunt instruments, and treaties were merely interruptions to his art. His desires clashed with the rigid framework of Roman tradition. He wanted to be adored not as a ruler, but as the greatest artist Rome had ever known. To his critics, this was vanity. To Nero, it was destiny. Those closest to him, his advisors, his family, even his lovers, knew the danger of his passions. His whims became commands, his artistic failures, blood-soaked purges. The empire itself bent under the weight of his obsessions. Yet no one dared challenge the emperor openly. They applauded his performances, bowed to his fantasies, and whispered their fears only in the shadows. For in Nero's Rome, beauty was no longer an ideal to be pursued, it was a weapon to be wielded. And the emperor, drunk on his own reflection, was ready to use it against friend and foe alike. Nero had always believed that love, like art, was a performance, passionate, fleeting, and meant to captivate an audience. But when he encountered the one figure who would ignite his most dangerous desire, love became something else, a secret too volatile to ever see the light of Rome. The object of his affection was someone forbidden by every measure of tradition and politics. Some whispered it was a woman of senatorial blood, others that it was a man tied to the imperial household itself. What mattered was that their very existence threatened the fragile balance of Nero's reign. To love openly was impossible. To love in silence was unbearable. And so the emperor, accustomed to commanding legions and silencing dissent, found himself ensnared by a vulnerability he could neither suppress nor control. Their meetings took place in shadows. The candlelit chambers of the Domus Aurea, the hushed corners of gardens where marble statues stood as silent witnesses, the secluded alcoves of theaters long after the crowds had dispersed. Every stolen glance was a risk, every whispered word a potential scandal. And yet Nero, intoxicated by danger, pursued it with the same fervor he gave to his performances. His lover became both muse and curse. Inspired by this hidden passion, Nero composed songs of longing so raw that even his closest advisors, hearing them performed in court, grew uneasy. Who is the shadow behind the melody, they wondered. What name hides in the emperor's trembling voice? Those who knew dared not speak, for to expose the affair was to court death. But Rome itself was a city of spies. Slaves carried gossip in hushed tones through the markets. Senators dispatched informants disguised as servants. Even the walls seemed to listen. And so the secret of Nero's forbidden love was always on the edge of discovery, like a storm cloud threatening to break. The affair also deepened Nero's paranoia. Every senator became a rival, every general a potential usurper who might use his secret to topple him. His passion, once a source of inspiration, became a vulnerability that eroded his confidence as emperor. He began to suspect even his family, those closest to him, for what would they do if they uncovered the truth? Would they protect him, or would they wield his love as a weapon against him? Still, Nero could not let go. In the private moments, when the empire's weight seemed unbearable, this forbidden love was his only refuge. It was the one place where he felt neither emperor nor god, but simply a man desperate to be loved without condition. But Rome was not a city that forgave weakness. And as the whispers grew louder, Nero would soon be forced to choose: silence his own heart, or silence those who threatened to expose it. Rome's elite adored Nero's banquets, or at least pretended to. They were not merely feasts but theater, staged with the precision of a play and the cruelty of a trial. Golden trays overflowed with exotic delicacies: flamingo tongues, honey-glazed dormice, oysters brought from distant coasts. Perfumed oils dripped from marble fountains, and the air was thick, with incense so strong it made guests dizzy. But beneath the splendor, fear simmered. No one came to dine with the emperor without wondering if the evening would end in laughter or death. This particular banquet began like the others, with courtiers flattering Nero's every gesture. He entered the hall in robes dyed imperial purple, crowned not with laurel but with a wreath of roses, as though the god Bacchus himself had descended to preside. Musicians plucked strings and flutes as he raised his cup, his eyes scanning the long tables, crowded with senators, generals, and advisors. Each one knew why they had been summoned. Whispers of betrayal had reached the emperor's ears, and tonight he intended to test their loyalty. The feast unfolded as a spectacle. Dancers performed to Nero's own compositions, their bodies twisting in homage to his music. Actors recited verses that painted the emperor as both hero and god. The guests applauded, smiling through clenched jaws, terrified of showing less enthusiasm than their peers. Every toast, every laugh, felt like a line rehearsed in a deadly play. Then came the wine. Golden chalices, each filled by slaves trembling with the weight of their task, were set before the guests. Some cups were filled from one amphora, some from another. No one could tell which contained vintage from Capri, and which contained something far more sinister. Conversation faltered. Guests stared at their cups, then at one another, searching for signs. Who would drink first? Who would hesitate too long? Finally, Nero himself raised his chalice, his smile sharp as a blade. "To Rome," he declared, "eternal and pure." The hall echoed with forced cheers as the guests followed suit, the liquid sliding down their throats like molten lead. Moments later, the theater shifted. One senator coughed violently, his face turning pale. Another's hands trembled so hard he dropped his cup, spilling crimson across the marble floor. Laughter from Nero cut through the gasps, a laugh too rehearsed, too cold. "Ah," he said, "it seems some of you are unfit for the performance of loyalty." Panic spread in silence. None dared flee. To rise from the table was to declare oneself guilty. Some lived, sweating through the ordeal. Others slumped lifeless over their plates, their last meal mocked by the emperor's musicians, who played louder to drown the sound of their dying. When the banquet ended, the survivors staggered from the hall with forced smiles, careful not to betray their terror. Allies had fallen alongside enemies, and none could be sure why. Nero had turned hospitality into a weapon, a game where every guest was both actor and victim. And as the lamps flickered low, Rome understood a new truth. To dine with the emperor was to gamble with one's life. The Roman throne was gilded, but it was never secure. Nero knew this truth better than most, for the greatest threats to an emperor often came not from distant enemies, but from within the imperial household itself. His palace, draped in silks and guarded by legions, was in truth a nest of serpents, where blood ties offered no shield against ambition. From the beginning, Nero's ascent had been shaped by betrayal. His own mother, Agrippina, had maneuvered him onto the throne, whispering poison into ears and clearing obstacles with ruthless efficiency. But once crowned, Nero discovered that the woman who had given him power also meant to control it. She was mother, advisor, and rival all in one, a shadow cast too long across his reign. Their bond, already frayed by his independence, snapped when whispers reached Nero that she plotted to replace him with another, perhaps Britannicus, Claudius's true-born son, or perhaps a puppet she could mold more easily. Paranoia gnawed at the emperor. Every family gathering became a performance of false smiles and unspoken threats. His cousin Lucius eyed the throne with barely veiled hunger. His aunt Domitia spread rumors through the noble houses, stoking fires of discontent. Even in moments of supposed intimacy, banquets, festivals, quiet evenings, Nero felt the weight of betrayal pressing from all sides. The breaking point came when one of his spies intercepted a letter, a coded message suggesting that members of his own bloodline had sworn a pact to overthrow him. It was never clear whether the conspiracy was real or fabricated, but to Nero it mattered little. In the theater of his paranoia, suspicion was guilt, and guilt demanded punishment. The purge began quietly. Britannicus, still a youth, died suddenly after sipping wine at a family feast, his death explained away as illness, but whispered of as murder. Domitia vanished from the public eye, her estate confiscated by the crown. Lucius, once a trusted companion, was dragged from his villa under the cover of night, accused of treason, and stripped of his dignity before the Senate. But the most shocking act of betrayal was reserved for Agrippina herself. Their relationship had soured beyond repair, and Nero convinced himself that her ambitions would not rest until she held his crown in her hands. Orders were given, a ship sabotaged to sink with her aboard, an accident meant to silence her forever. Yet Agrippina survived the wreck, crawling from the wreckage with the will of a lioness. Only then did Nero send assassins to finish what fate had failed to accomplish. The empire shuddered at the news. The emperor who sang of love and beauty had raised his hand against his own mother. To some, it was a necessary act of survival. To others, an unthinkable crime against nature itself. But for Nero, it was a grim necessity. Family was no longer family. It was the first enemy to be conquered. And as he looked upon his bloodline, now thinned by poison and dagger, Nero understood that power demanded isolation. Trust had no place on the throne. Rome thrived on rumors, but none spread faster or cut deeper than those concerning the imperial succession. The people could endure famine, war, even fire, but they could not endure uncertainty over who would rule them next. And in Nero's court, uncertainty became a weapon. The story began with an heir, an innocent figure whose very existence threatened Nero's fragile grip on power. Some claimed it was Britannicus, the son of Claudius, who had once been whispered about as Rome's rightful ruler before his untimely death. Others murmured of a younger child, a relative kept in the shadows, groomed by scheming senators to one day wear the crown. The truth was deliberately obscured, for in Nero's world, clarity was dangerous. What was known is this: the heir vanished. One morning, the palace awoke to silence where laughter had once been. The child's chambers stood empty, his bed untouched, his servants trembling under questioning. There were no signs of struggle, no blood spilled, no broken doors. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed him whole. The disappearance was a scandal too large to be contained, and within hours, rumors coursed through Rome like wildfire. Did Nero order the child taken, spirited away under cover of night to ensure no rival bloodline could challenge him? Or was it the Senate, orchestrating a plot to hide the heir and raise him in secrecy, waiting for the perfect moment to return him as a savior against tyranny? Nero himself played the role of the grieving ruler with masterful precision. He declared public concern, ordered searches across the empire, and summoned astrologers and soothsayers to divine the boy's fate. But in the quiet corners of the palace, servants whispered of the emperor's sudden calm, his unnerving satisfaction, as if the disappearance had been a performance staged to perfection. What made the scandal even darker were the contradictions in the accounts. Some swore they had seen soldiers escorting a hooded figure through the palace gardens at midnight. Others claimed the child had been poisoned days before, and that the vanishing was merely a cover for murder. Still others insisted the heir lived, hidden among commoners, protected by those who dreamed of restoring the Republic. The uncertainty was deliberate, for it served Nero well. With no heir, no rival claimant, he stood unchallenged. Yet the whispers haunted him. Every shadowed street corner might conceal an avenger. Every feast might host a boy grown into a man who returned to claim his destiny. In the Senate, questions turned to accusations. In the streets, songs of mourning were sung for the, quote, lost prince. And in Nero's palace, the gilded halls grew colder, for even the emperor's allies wondered. If a child of the imperial blood could vanish so completely, what safety was left for anyone? The vanished heir was no longer a person but a ghost, an idea haunting Rome, a reminder that Nero's throne was built not on marble, but on secrets. In the city of Rome, gods walked only in myths, yet for a select few, Nero was no longer mortal, he was divine, a living embodiment of power and artistry. It began quietly, as whispers always do. A group of priests and zealots enamored with the emperor's music and beauty began holding secret ceremonies in shadowed temples, offering prayers and sacrifices in his honor. To them, Nero was not just Caesar, he was a god among men. At first, Nero treated the adulation with amusement. He watched from the balconies of the Domus Aurea as devotees chanted his name in the dead of night, their voices blending with the wind through marble columns. The devotion flattered him, yet also intrigued him. Rome had always obeyed through fear and law, now it obeyed through reverence, and reverence was far more intoxicating. But soon, the cult became something more than praise, it became power. They delivered messages in coded verse, predicting omens that favored the emperor, framing disasters and victories as signs of his divine will. Senators began to notice the sway these rituals held over ordinary citizens, and unease spread through the elite. Some whispered that the cult could destabilize the empire itself, turning devotion into rebellion, obedience into fanaticism. Nero, for his part, indulged the illusion. He ordered temples decorated with his likeness, public statues erected that merged his features with Jupiter, Apollo, and Bacchus. The boundaries between mortal and deity blurred. He reveled in the paradox. Rome, his city, was trembling with fear, but now it trembled with worship as well. Every ceremony reinforced the image he desired, not merely an emperor, but an immortal figure whose legacy would echo beyond the ages. Yet the cult was a double-edged sword. Advisors warned him that blind devotion could provoke jealousy among generals and senators. If people truly believed he was divine, what would stop them from questioning his decisions when reality clashed with myth? Every ritual, every prayer, every incense offering was now both a blessing and a trap. For Nero, the line between manipulation and madness was vanishing. The priests themselves, clever and ambitious, began leveraging their access. They claimed visions of rivals plotting against the emperor, predicting doom if Nero did not act swiftly. Orders were sent, and soon those accused vanished or were imprisoned. Rome's elite realized that the cult's devotion was not simply adoration. It was leverage, a weapon concealed beneath veils of incense and chants. As Nero watched the city bend beneath this new form of reverence, he felt both omnipotent and increasingly paranoid. To be worshipped as a god was intoxicating, yes, but to be betrayed by gods in human form? That possibility gnawed at him relentlessly. Rome, already a city of fire and intrigue, now burned with devotion, fear, and uncertainty. And in the shadows, the cult continued to grow, feeding Nero's ego while tightening its grip on the empire. Rome slept uneasily that night. The city, already a tangle of narrow streets and wooden insulae, seemed to hold its breath as flames ignited in the heart of the Forum. The fire spread like a living thing, consuming shops, warehouses, and homes with a ferocity that turned marble and timber alike into ash. From the Domus Aurea, Nero watched, his silhouette outlined by the flickering glow of the inferno, his expression unreadable. The populace screamed and scrambled through streets choked with smoke, temples collapsed, and the cries of the dying echoed off stone walls. Nero, who had long understood that power was as much perception as reality, saw opportunity in catastrophe. The flames could erase more than structures. They could erase enemies, inconvenient truths, and the secrets of a forbidden love that must remain hidden at all costs. Within hours, Nero orchestrated his cover-up. He deployed legions not to fight the fire, but to manage the narrative. Rumors were planted in taverns and forums. The fire was accidental, a result of careless merchants, or divine punishment against wicked citizens. He ensured chroniclers emphasized his supposed heroism, praising the emperor who stood amid the flames, weeping for his city. Rome would remember the fire not for its destruction, but for the spectacle of its ruler's concern. Behind closed doors, however, Nero's interventions were far more deliberate and deadly. Those who knew too much about his secret affairs, those whose loyalty was uncertain, were discreetly removed from the city. Couriers intercepted messages, servants vanished, and entire households were quietly displaced. Anyone with knowledge of the emperor's forbidden romance or his prior purges suddenly disappeared under the guise of the chaos. Death and abduction became part of the fire's shadow, an invisible conflagration that consumed human lives as readily as timber. Paranoia gripped Nero even as the city burned. He suspected that some of his own generals might take advantage of the chaos to plot rebellion. Senators, he feared, could twist tragedy into opportunity, using the fire to discredit him. So he tightened his inner circle, surrounding himself with the most loyal or most terrified individuals. Each decision was calculated, each order a blade hidden beneath the silk of imperial command. By the time the fire subsided, nearly 2/3 of Rome lay in smoldering ruin. Public outrage simmered, but the emperor's careful manipulation of witnesses and chroniclers kept blame away from him. Still, the whispers persisted. People murmured about the suspicious timing, about the fire's sudden spread, about the emperor who had seemed too composed. The rumors would linger like smoke, a constant threat to Nero's carefully constructed image. As the city rebuilt, Nero's secret remained intact. The fire had consumed what he wanted erased, but it had also revealed the true power of perception, fear, and control. In Rome, truth was now as malleable as molten bronze, and the emperor had shown himself a master craftsman of both destruction and deception. Rome was no longer a city of open streets and public markets. It had become a labyrinth of whispers, coded messages, and shadowed allegiances. Every corner held a potential traitor, every servant a spy, every friend a masked enemy. In the aftermath of the fire, Nero's court had transformed into a stage for intrigues so dense that even the emperor, master manipulator though he was, found himself caught in its threads. The conspiracies began subtly, as all do. Senators met in cloaked chambers, discussing grievances under the guise of loyalty. Generals exchanged glances across banquet tables, silently judging Nero's decisions, weighing when and how to act. Slaves carried messages hidden in scrolls and inside hollowed-out loaves of bread, their lives hanging by the thinnest thread of trust. And everywhere, Nero's spies moved like shadows, listening, reporting, fabricating rumors that he could then twist to his advantage. Each revelation in this tangled web prompted a reaction from the emperor. Some conspiracies were crushed swiftly, plots discovered before they could fully materialize. A general who hesitated too long in a maneuver against barbarian tribes would find himself reassigned to the provinces, effectively exiled. Senators caught exchanging cryptic letters with rivals were banished or quietly executed. Yet for every scheme uncovered, two more seemed to appear, as if the city itself was conspiring against its ruler. The complexity of the intrigue gnawed at Nero's mind. He could no longer distinguish between truth and deception. The line between friend and foe blurred into near invisibility. Even those closest to him, the ministers, the loyal courtiers, the few remaining family members, were suspect. Was a whispered suggestion genuine counsel or a trap? Was a hesitant glance fear or prelude to betrayal? The emperor's paranoia grew, feeding itself, until every smile was suspect and every gesture a potential threat. The most dangerous conspiracies, however, were the invisible ones, those that could not be traced or confronted openly. Rumors of assassins hiding among servants, of bribed soldiers ready to turn their swords, of allies secretly corresponding with Rome's enemies, suffused the palace halls. Nero reacted not only with punishment but with deception, crafting his own counterplots to confuse and entrap his adversaries. He became a spider at the center of a massive web, aware that a single misstep could trap him in his own snare. Yet amid this chaos, Nero found a perverse satisfaction. To manipulate and outwit conspirators became another art, a performance where stakes were life and death. Each uncovered plot reinforced his power, even as the uncertainty gnawed at him. The emperor, once celebrated as a god among men, now lived suspended in suspicion, his every thought entangled in a mesh of treachery. Rome itself seemed to pulse with the tension, the city's heart beating in rhythm with the conspiracies that twisted through its streets and palaces. And as Nero observed this world of shadows, he realized the ultimate truth. In an empire built on ambition and fear, even the most cunning emperor could never fully untangle the web he had created, or escape the consequences of its ever-tightening threads. By the time Nero reached the height of his reign, the emperor's gilded mask, the public image of the artist king, the divine performer, was cracking. Behind the velvet robes, the orchestrated smiles, and the melodic declarations of divinity lay a man consumed by fear, obsession, and the corrosive knowledge that no throne, no matter how secure it seemed, could shield him from betrayal. The first cracks appeared in whispers. Allies who once praised him openly began to murmur doubts in private. Senators who had bowed at his feet now hesitated, testing whether the golden veil of loyalty might hide sharp daggers. Even the cult of devotees, once devoted entirely to his divinity, occasionally hesitated, questioning omens and visions. Nero, attuned to every expression, heard the faintest tremors of dissent and felt them as blows to his ego. In response, the emperor's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Banquets that once dazzled now twisted into stages for terror. Courtiers were punished for minor slights. Executions became spectacles, with the condemned paraded through the palace before their deaths. Friends who had supported him in private were publicly humiliated, their loyalty questioned in front of witnesses, their lives forever altered by a single misjudged glance. Nero delighted in such cruelty, but it was a poisoned pleasure, one that fed paranoia more than power. Family ties, too, dissolved under the weight of mistrust. Even those closest to him, cousins, siblings, and former lovers, were seen as potential threats. Letters intercepted, secret meetings monitored, even private whispers in the night were grounds for exile or execution. Nero's court became a place where loyalty was impossible, and affection a dangerous illusion. Every smile, every embrace, every friendly word could mask betrayal. As the mask continued to fracture, Nero's artistry turned inward. He performed not for the masses, nor for the gods, but for himself, an obsessive replay of every slight, every betrayal, every imagined insult. Music became a tool of obsession, poetry a means of self-affirmation. The emperor no longer lived for the applause of Rome, but for the reassurance that he alone could dominate his world. Yet the more he attempted to control, the more the empire seemed to resist. By this point, Rome no longer saw an emperor, only a man unhinged by power. Allies feared him, enemies despised him, and the populace whispered of madness behind the golden curtain. Nero's mask of the artist king had been shattered, revealing a man both brilliant and terrifying, a ruler capable of cruelty as profound as his creativity, capable of beauty as cold as the fear he inspired. The collapse of the mask marked a turning point. No longer could Nero rely on illusion. In the halls of his palace, the screams of the punished, the silence of the wary, and the shadows of plotting courtiers reflected back a single truth. A ruler who wears no mask is exposed, vulnerable, and dangerously unpredictable. Rome, once ablaze with grandeur, intrigue, and whispered secrets, now teetered on the edge of revelation. The threads of Nero's reign, romances, conspiracies, betrayals, cults, and fires, had twisted together into a single inevitable climax. What remained hidden for so long could no longer be contained. The city was poised to witness the ultimate scandal, one that would expose not only the emperor but the very myths that had shaped Roman history. It began with the chroniclers. Those who had meticulously recorded Nero's triumphs and tragedies began to murmur inconsistencies, questioning the official narrative of a godlike ruler. Rumors of his forbidden love, of poisoned heirs, of blood spilled in the name of perfection began to leak through hidden scrolls and letters. Rome's elite, previously cowed by fear or dazzled by spectacle, started piecing together fragments of truth, forming a picture of an emperor far darker than history had ever admitted. But it was not just the chroniclers. Survivors of Nero's purges, hidden heirs, and escaped conspirators converged quietly, their testimonies forming a web of accusation too intricate to ignore. The public, who had once cheered for the music, theater, and divine proclamations, now whispered about betrayal at the highest levels, about a ruler who had turned the empire into a stage for cruelty and obsession. Even the cult of the living God, previously devoted in unshakable reverence, began to fracture. Priests who had once claimed visions and omens in Nero's favor now questioned his judgment, their loyalty shaken by the revelation of murder and manipulation. The line between divine will and human ambition blurred, and Rome's citizens could no longer distinguish between worship and complicity. Nero, sensing the shifting tide, attempted to regain control. Decrees were issued, witnesses silenced, and propaganda spread, but the scandal had momentum. Every act of suppression fed the rumors, every execution became proof of guilt. The emperor's web of power, intricate and fearsome, now threatened to ensnare him. Allies turned cold, spies disappeared, and even family, long loyal or long coerced, began to see the man behind the mask for what he truly was. The climax arrived in a public forum. The city gathered in tense anticipation. Documents, confessions, and testimonies, some coerced, some genuine, were laid bare. Rome's people finally saw the full picture, a ruler who had manipulated fire, art, love, and devotion to maintain his empire. A man who had destroyed both enemies and family in the pursuit of perfection. A god only in illusion, a tyrant in reality. In the aftermath, the empire reeled. Nero's legacy was forever transformed, not merely as a ruler of Rome, but as the central figure in a scandal that reshaped history itself. The emperor who had once believed himself immortal was revealed to be mortal, flawed, fearful, and profoundly human. And in the ruins of his grandeur, the city learned the ultimate lesson. Power built on obsession, secrecy, and fear cannot withstand the relentless light of truth. Rome would remember Nero not for his music, his performances, or his divine pretensions, but for the scandals that made the empire question everything it thought it knew.